NBA free agency has started. The Utah Jazz have $43.6 million of cap space. It is the fifth most amount of cap space of any team in the NBA. Fourth most? Are there players that move the meter, or how should the Jazz use the space? What happens when Paul George, James Harden, and Klay Thompson make their moves, and how does it impact the Utah Jazz? And what do the Jazz do with the Lauri Markkanen situation? It's all next on a live edition of Locked on Jazz.
You are Locked on Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
It's a special live edition, NBA free agency live edition of Locked on Jazz coming your direction right now. We're also live on Instagram at DLock09, which we aren't usually. That's why, because it's a special day to all of this. So let's get to it right now. We've got some moves that have happened. Let's set the scene of what's taking place and continue to monitor it as time goes on. Here's the first situation. The Jazz have $43.8 million of cap space. That is the fourth most of any team in the NBA. The number one team is Philadelphia, who's supposedly going after Paul George with 58.4. Number two is Detroit with 58.2, and they're likely to keep their powder dry. Orlando's at 52 million, and then the Utah Jazz are at 43.8, followed by the Thunder at 37.5, and the San Antonio Spurs at 34.4. Let's get some other details out on this whole thing. By the way, I didn't even do an open. I'm so fired up. I am David Locke, radio voice of the Utah Jazz, Jazz NBA insider, and this is Locked on Jazz. Locked on Jazz is your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz, giving you insight, expertise, geeky numbers, and hopefully making it way better to be a Jazz fan. We are free and available on all podcasting apps. So if you're watching live on Instagram right now and don't regularly watch the show, you can get it on all of your podcasting apps, and you can also get it on YouTube. Hit the bell button on YouTube as well as the subscribe button. Bunch of comments are in the comment section. I'll try to get to those as the show goes on, but I've got some things structured and set to start here. So the first piece of information is the Jazz have $43.8 million of cap space. The second thing are some geeky numbers. The NBA salary cap has been set at $141 million. The luxury tax is at $171. The first apron's at $178. And the second apron's at $190. Okay, this is geeky, but let's just make it easy for us. We're going to go with this as how we remember it. $140 is the cap. $170 is the luxury tax. $180 is the first apron, and $190 is the second, right? $170, $180, $190. That's kind of what we need to remember. You don't want to go on the tax if you're the Jazz. So that's our break is $170. If you're a really good team, you really don't want to go over $180, okay? It's a little less, but that's kind of how that's easy for us to figure out. There are a bunch of teams with cap space that don't have functional cap space. So that's Charlotte at 11, maybe the Spurs at 34. So there's really only 6 teams in all of the NBA right now that have functional cap space. Philadelphia at 58, Detroit at 58, Orlando at 52, Utah at 44, Oklahoma City at 37, and San Antonio at 34. Those are the 6 teams that have any cap space that actually matters. We'll get into first and second apron and what those mean here at 1 second. They're super geeky. But let's first take a look at the free agents that are available right now in the NBA. We'll first look at the big-time players that are available, and then we'll look at by position. Superstar players. There are 3 superstar players available in free agency. LeBron James, who will re-sign with the Lakers. Tyrese Maxey, who's 23 years old and is going to get the max deal from Philadelphia. And Paul George, who's 34 and doesn't really match the Utah Jazz timeline. Paul George has declined his $48.7 million option and will enter free agency and have meetings with the Clippers, Sixers, and Magic, which means, this is why this is important, we just talked about the 6 teams with cap space, right? So Philadelphia's cap space is tied up till Paul George makes a decision. Orlando's cap space is tied up until Paul George makes a decision. which means Detroit at $58 million, Utah at 44, Oklahoma City at 38, and San Antonio at 34 are the only free agent money players right now. Okay? Dallas, by the way, has made enough deals that they could probably do something a little bit on the after their last trades on the Klay Thompson front, and we'll talk about that a little bit. Okay. Starters, players that are starters that could actually start and maybe impact the Utah Jazz next year that are available. James Harden has just signed a 2-year, $70 million deal with the LA Clippers. We probably weren't in on it. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope is 31 years old, is a shooting guard, and might be available. DeAnthony Melton, really good defensive player, not a great shooter, 26 years old, kind of matches our timeline, might be available. This gets into a tricky little area for us here in a second. Klay Thompson, 34, we're probably not interested. And when you start to look at the Jazz roster for a second, and we have Keontae George, and we have Isaiah Collier now, and we have Colin Sexton, and we still have Jordan Clarkson. If you signed to DeAnthony Melton, where does he fit? And how does he get on the roster? And how does he play? Obviously, depending who you might move here at some point, that could change things. But as the roster sits right now, that's what we have. And Chris Dunn is a free agent who I think most of us would like to have the Jazz bring back. There's your 5 guards. If you're going to sign someone like DeAnthony Melton, you have to replace one of those and decide that it's better than that. Small forward world, there's one player available, and that's DeMar DeRozan. We'll talk about DeMar DeRozan in the second segment because I think that's an interesting discussion, at least. There are 3 power forwards available. Detroit is going to use some of their cap space, I suspect, to re-sign Simone Fontecchio. That's why they traded for him. Made it clear to the Jazz that would do that. And then Miles Bridges and Derek Jones Jr. Miles Bridges has a domestic violence charge against him, has served his time in the NBA and legally, and is an eligible player in the NBA. And Charlotte did not trade him at the trade deadline, which leads you to believe they're going to re-sign him. But he is a 21.7 rebound, 3 assist game player who's a 35% three-point shooter at 6'7", 225. He is 26 years old, and he is the best player available. And so you have to decide, as a Utah Jazz fan, what you think of that. Because Miles Bridges is the best player available in free agency if you're the Utah Jazz. The second best player available is Isaiah Hartenstein. The New York Knicks re-signed OG Anunoby. They traded for Miles Bridges. You would think that they plan on re-signing Isaiah Hartenstein. However, if you're the Jazz and you're one of the 4 teams with cap space who's ready to act, Isaiah Hartenstein is 26 years old. He had a defensive all defensive team worthy year last year at 7 feet tall. He was absolutely fabulous for the Clippers. He's not going to wow you. He averages like 5 to 8 points a game. He grabs you about 6 to 8 rebounds a game. He doesn't shoot the 3 particularly well. He doesn't shoot it really at all, frankly. And he just seemingly does everything to make you win. So Isaiah Hartenstein is probably the second best player available in free agency. Miles Bridges is probably the best, and DeAnthony Melton might be the third best. That doesn't totally fire you up, does it? But that's what the market is. Now, I've got some Locke's likes and some things like that of guys that I kind of like that we'll get to here in a second. But let's review by position the top players available. The free agent point guards: Tyrese Maxey, Tyus Jones, Spencer Dinwiddie, Kyle Lowry, Markelle Fultz, Chris Dunn, Monty Morris, DeLon Wright, Aaron Holiday, Dennis Smith Jr., and Cameron Payne. And the Jazz roster currently has Keontae George, Colin Sexton, and then you have to figure out how much you believe that Isaiah Collier could play. And then you have to figure out Jordan Clarkson's situation and whether you're re-signing the Chris Dunn. And then do you think Bryce Sensabaugh is a 2 or a 3? He's probably both. I mean, I kind of love Bryce Sensabaugh and all of our young guys because they all seem to play multiple positions. I think Keontae's a 1 or a 2. Shooting guards. KCP, DeAnthony Melton, Klay Thompson, Gary Harris, veteran, Isaiah Joe, sharpshooter, Oklahoma City, Buddy Hield, Gary Trent Jr., young, good shooter for Toronto, Lonnie Walker, Malik Beasley, Evan Fournier, our friend Alec Burks, and Seth Curry. Not Steph, but Seth. And our top small forwards are DeMar DeRozan, Aaron Wiggins, Najee Marshall, Isaac Okoro, Khalid Martin, Kelly Oubre, our old friend Gordon Hayward, Taurean Prince, Cedi Osman, Sadiq Bey, and Doug McDermott. Your power forwards are Miles Bridges, Derek Jones Jr., Simone, our old friend, Haywood Highsmith, Tobias Harris, KJ Martin, Kyle Anderson, Jalen Smith, worth noting, Vjatko Konkar, Robert Covington. And our centers are Isaiah Hartenstein, Jonas Valanciunas, Andre Drummond, Mo Wagner, Luke Cornett, Mason Plumlee, Xavier Tillman, Goga Bitadze, and Luke Cornett. And when we come back, I will give you Locke's likes, and I will talk about the various things we can do with our cap space if none of those free agents totally fired you up as we continue on today's edition of Locked On Jazz, a live special NBA free agency edition. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Murdoch Hyundai, located at 4646 South State Street, also located in Logan and in Linden. Murdoch Hyundai with the Palisade I'm driving right now, which is absolutely fabulous. I had the Tucson before. That's the smaller SUV. It was great. The Palisade's on a different level, though. Bigger car, fits more people, has a few more bells and whistles, drives super smooth with a lot of pop. It is the granddad beauty of them all right now. And it is a very impressive vehicle. It is available at Murdoch Hyundai. If you're going to stop by Murdoch Hyundai at 4646 South State Street or in Logan or in Linden, please feel free to reach out to me and let us get you the VIP treatment you deserve as a Locked On everyday listener. That's over at Murdoch Hyundai, 4646 South State Street, also in Logan and in Linden. The Hyundai, get you more bells and whistles for the dollar than any car in the market. The Murdochs, 80 plus years in Utah, serving you right. Let them continue to do so. Today's show is also brought to you by FanDuel. Go to FanDuel.com/LockedOn to sign up today. The sports world might be slowing down a little bit, but FanDuel is increasing what it's doing for you. That's right. This summer, FanDuel's hooking up all customers with boost or bonus daily. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Go to FanDuel.com/LockedOn to start making the most of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. FanDuel often will have some odds on where players are going to land, too. Sometimes they stay away from that because it's kind of possible that the wrong people get involved. Dodgers and Giants will match up today. That spread continues to float around today. Right now, I think that it's an in-game spread because the Giants are up 10-2. Yes! Love it. You can get involved in WNBA. My friend Leaf Tulane loves to bet the tennis world. He's got that all figured out. So jump aboard over at FanDuel.com and take advantage of the bonuses. FanDuel.com/LockedOn. You are listening to Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Live edition today, special live edition over on Instagram as well for you. We are free and available on all podcasting apps for your second listen today. Make sure you tune in to Locked On NBA. We're not going away for the whole offseason. We'll be here every single day. Everybody else will go to shortened editions, but Locked On NBA keeps going and going and going and going. So make sure you tune it in, add it to your. All right, here's Locke's likes. By the way, some deals have come across. Before we get to Locke's likes, let's get to the deals that have come across and what's taking place. Luke Cornett has agreed to a 1-year deal with the Boston Celtics. Luke Cornett has done. The Sacramento Kings are pursuing a trade for Brandon Ingram. That's interesting. Alvin Gentry works for them. So that's the latest big news there. Chris Haynes has reported that the Bulls proposed Andrew Wiggins and Chris Paul for Zach LaVine, and Golden State said no, and that was the last liability that Golden State had to possibly trade Chris Paul, and they have released him. I'm trying to check what other deals might have taken place. James Harden has signed a 2-year deal with the Los Angeles Clippers. Klay Thompson plans to have discussions with the Mavericks, Lakers, Clippers, and 76ers in the opening hours of free agency. By the way, the James Harden 2-year, 70-year deal, his second year is a player option, according to Ramona Shelburne. So that's the breaking news as of right now. The Warriors and Klay Thompson likely separating. Paul George opting out is the biggest deal. Harden returning to the Clippers. Do the Clippers think they don't need Paul George and Kawhi Leonard? Is the big three world over? Are we into a big two world now? Interesting. All right. Let's go to what my Locks likes. Jalen Smith, Indiana center, is really interesting to me. So for a few reasons. One, when we looked at points gained, Smith had a pretty good year last year and the year before. Jalen Smith was a 1.5 points gained player for the Indiana Pacers last year, a mass improvement. He went to Phoenix in a team that didn't care about young players, got drafted 10th in the draft. He's a big man that can shoot the three, and he went to Phoenix and he got kind of lost in the mix. And then this last year, he went to Indiana and shot 42% from three, a little bit in limited time. But I think the Jazz should be using free agency. And then I don't know how many players you can afford to have on the same timeline. So I would understand. I think that's a worthwhile discussion. But to me, Jalen Smith is a young player, came out of the University of Maryland, 24 years of age, was the 10th pick of the draft. He doesn't move perfectly, but he's got some skills and he can really shoot it. And this last year, he played 61 games. He shot at 42%. His career's 34%. I don't think that's probably right. But I think he's a stretch 5 center at 6'10", or he could probably play a little power forward and work. He's very similar to, not quite as good as Taylor Hendricks, but similar to Taylor Hendricks, maybe actually very similar to Taylor Hendricks. One was a 9th pick, the other was a 10th pick. And again, this is one of the biggest issues with how the Jazz do this, that I don't know how they do this. Because when you suddenly start looking at our roster and you're like, okay, well, Taylor Hendricks is going to have to play, and then I have Jalen Smith, do they block each other? Or does that actually become your tandem with Lauri, and you have Walker and you have John Collins? And now how do we get all these guys minutes and how do they all play? It wasn't the most ideal world to end up with 6 players in their first or second year in a roster and 7 players in their second or third or their second year or less on the roster. Like, that's not ideal, but that's the way the cookie crumbled. And now we have to deal with it. Isaiah Hartenstein, I think, is interesting. It might mean you move Walker. It might not. They're different. Hartenstein, but they're actually, frankly, Hartenstein is what you want Walker to become if we really want to get into it. I think Walker's probably got a little bit more talent, but Hartenstein plays so crazy hard that you might do something. A personal favorite of mine from the very beginning of the draft cycle and still today is Mo Wagner. Mo Wagner was in Orlando last year with his brother. It might be awfully hard to get Wagner out. He originally was in LA, then he bounced around to Washington, Boston. And he's been in Orlando for the last 3 years, and he's totally found himself as an NBA player. He has not shot the three as well as I would have suspected as him coming out of college. He's a 32% three-point shooter. He's a really good offensive player at 6'11", 245. and not a particularly good defensive player. His points gained is 1.5 again. He is one of the better points gained players available for those who are tuning for the first time and have no idea what points gained is. Points gained is my offensive metric of how I evaluate offensive players. The number 1.5, there's about 10 players in the NBA that were last year that were over 2.0. Joel Embiid was the best in the NBA at 3.5. Giannis was 3.2. Jokic 2.8. Shea 2.6. Daniel Gafford 2.3. Jared Allen 2.1. Centers that can dunk matter. Kristaps 2.1. Luka 2.1. LeBron 2.0. Durant 2.0. Rudy 2.0. And Grayson Allen 2.0. Lowry was 1.9. Then Nick Richards in Charlotte, who if they're willing to move, I'd be really interested in. Mark Williams in Charlotte. Derek Lively, Kawhi Leonard, Domantas Sabonis, Anthony Davis, Zubac, Karl Anthony Towns, and then a bunch of guys at 1.5. Jalen Duren, Mo Wagner, Jimmy Butler, Steph Curry, Obi Toppin, Jalen Smith, Onyeka Okongwu, Devin Booker, Chet Holmgren at 1.4. I really like both Jalen Smith and Mo Wagner. Neither of them great defensive players, but I like they both could play the 5. Smith could probably sneak into a little 4. He doesn't move great laterally, but those are 2 free agent guys I'd be interested in, and you might be able to give him an offer right now that nobody else can do because Philadelphia and Orlando are tied up in their money, and Orlando might not be able to act right now because they're waiting to see what happens with Paul George. Just a thought. Guards. So we have Keontae. We have Isaiah Collier. We would probably like to bring back Chris Dunn. I don't know what our plan is with Jason Preston, but I'm not sure he really impacts what we do. We just let Kyra Lewis Jr. go. There are a few guards that I think are a little interesting. So former number 1 pick of the draft, Markelle Fultz, still is not a shooter, but he runs a team well. I think he's mature. I think he could add a lot to us. His offense is troublesome. He's a minus 1.4 points gained player, so that is really negative compared to what I usually am willing to do. But of players that are out there that actually can kind of run a team, I kind of like Markelle Fultz in that sense. But I think his offense is super limited, and I wouldn't touch that until the entire market goes dry on him and you have him on a really cheap contract. I kind of like Aaron Holiday. He is too small. He is limited. All sorts of things like that. On the other end, like when I look at Aaron Holiday, the one thing that jumped out about me last year is the day he came in and punked Keontae George. And Aaron Holiday last year was a dead even 0 points gained player. He took 44% of his shots from 3, and he made 39% of them, and he's little, and he's small, and he's tough as hell. And I would love to have that. If we're going to lose Chris Dunn, I would love to see Aaron Holiday get added to the mix. He's 6 feet, 185. I get he's small. I got all that. He's a career 38% three-point shooter. And I just think he is off. Okay? So that's a guy for me. All right. Shooting guards and some other names as we continue coming up here on Locked On Jazz. The shooting guards, and I don't know what we have as a shooting guard on our roster. We have Colin Sexton and Jordan Clarkson, which to me are like scoring 1s that are kind of 2s. We have Keontae George, who's kind of a 1-2. Like we don't really have a shooting. I think Colin has to play shooting guard, but he's not a shooting guard, if that seems fair. He's not really a point. He's just a bona fide first step, 25-year-old scoring stud. So Gary Trent Jr. is probably the biggest name and probably the one where you'd have to pay Gary Trent Jr. more than the mid-level exception. Gary Trent Jr. is 25 years of age. He is a career 39% three-point shooter. He has started 70, 44, and 41 games the last 3 years. It is worth noting that his minutes have gone down each of the last 3 years in Toronto, which might mean that there's something that they don't love about him. But at one point, he averaged 18, 17, 14 points a game. Gary Trent Jr. would be our starting shooting guard. What we would do with Jordan Clarkson at that point, how we would manage the minutes, I don't know. But Gary Trent Jr. would be our starting shooting guard at 39% three-point shooter. Isaiah Joe would probably not be our starting shooting guard. Isaiah Joe is 6'4", feels like he's a small 6'4" at 165 pounds, but this dude can stroke it at the highest of high levels. Oklahoma City right now, 41% three-point shooter the last 2 years. Why Philadelphia gave up on him, I don't know. He bombed like 10 a game when he was at either Alabama or Arkansas. And he is just a bona fide shooter that has great gravity. And I think he's got a chance to be like the next Kyle Korver of the NBA, where he's out there and you have to guard him and it changes everything for you. I don't know the numbers, but I would guess if we went over to cleaning the glass and we looked at the Oklahoma City offense, I would guess it would be like weirdly better. I'm going to do this. We'll find out if I'm right or not. I love when I make these thoughts and then I don't know the answer. I would guess that if we looked at the on-off, that it's weirdly better with Isaiah Joe on the floor. Unfortunately, I cannot get it. I've had some problems recently with my account and I keep paying Ben Falk and it keeps not thinking I paid him. So yeah. All right. So I don't have that. Sorry. That's like the one data point I'll have to get that figured out. Okay. Flyer. So those are two shooting guards I like. Here's a flyer on a player that I think would probably want to get out where he is. And that's Brandon Boston. Brandon Boston was the number 4 high school player in the country in 2020. He went to Kentucky for a year, did very little, and then he got to the Clippers, and he just doesn't get a chance to play with those veteran players. And the word on the street last year when we were in Hawaii was they were ecstatic about Brandon Boston. Absolutely ecstatic. And then he got hurt and he didn't play. He's only played 52 games in the last 2 years. He's 6'7", 185 pounds, and you just can't find 22-year-olds with this kind of athleticism and this pieces to him. And it's not all there. He's 31% three-point shooter. It's not there. But, I would put it into our mix. Okay? I would put it into our mix. Isaac Okoro is the former 5th pick of the NBA draft. He is my poster child of why you shouldn't draft players of the 5th pick of an NBA draft who can't shoot. But we don't have to take him 5th. We can get him as a free agent. He did shoot 39% from 3 this year. He shot 36 the year before. He shot 35 the year before that. And he shot 29 the year before that, which is pretty good improvement. He is one of the best defenders in the NBA. And there's something interesting going on about defense in the NBA. And what's interesting about defense in the NBA is the fact that the best defensive players in the NBA, Dylan Brooks, Lou Dort, Isaac Okoro, Jrue Holiday, are tough as hell. Physically huge, strong people. We think of it as like Jaden McDaniels as a lateral, long defensive player who got absolutely manhandled by Luka Doncic in the playoffs. I actually think that the game is getting more to the best defensive players in the NBA are physically imposing beasts. And Isaac Okoro is a physically imposing beast of a player who could guard the best player. We literally have nobody on our roster that can guard the best player on the other team. Like literally, if we started a game tomorrow and we start Keontae George and Colin Sexton and Lauri Markkanen and Taylor Hendricks and Walker Kessler, we were throwing Taylor on the best player of the other team to close games, to start games last year, kind of because it was fun and let Taylor learn. But that's not really yet a viable option for Taylor Hendricks. And so the fact of the matter is that we need someone we can throw out there who can physically guard the best player. Isaac Okoro is the best defensive player that's available as a free agent in this draft or in this time period. And lastly, I give you Sadiq Bey, who was drafted by the 19th pick by the Cleveland Cavaliers. If I'm being, actually, by the Detroit Pistons. If I'm being completely honest, I didn't love him out of the draft, and he has completely impressed me in how much better he is as an NBA player. He did not shoot it this well in Atlanta at 32%. He's kind of a mid-range hooper. Kind of can go get a bucket. He's averaged about 10 or 15 points a game throughout his NBA career at a moderate to not particularly efficient level. But I don't know if he'll be, I think he might be cheap. And I think he might be better than we have. He's a negative 0.8 points game player. All right. A few other names that are probably worth just mentioning that I didn't include. Tyus Jones, backup point guard. Just to give us stability, it would just to give the way Chris Dunn did if Chris Dunn doesn't come back. It would just give us somebody who and he's an even points game player, would give us somebody that Will Hardy could just turn to, have actually run a play and feel good about it. I think that's actually super important. Monty Morris is another one where I think that works. DeLon Wright, former U, maybe. And that's probably it on point guards. Malachi Flynn is going to be available for free. Virtually, I thought he was really good coming out of college. He's not been good. He's a good pick and roll player. I might take a flyer on seeing whether or not he could be better. In the shooting guard world, Shake Milton's a free agent. Again, if his market goes dry, I don't mind. I think he's a good player. Nobody else really jumps out. On the shooting end of things, Joe Harris and Doug McDermott might just be nice to allow. If we can get some shooting, it'll allow other guys to play. Joe Harris's ankle's been really bad. He might not be able to move anymore. On fours, we could go get Antetokounmpo so that we can sign Giannis. I joke. Kevin Love's not going to be available. I actually think Lamar Stevens is tough as hell and plays, and he's available, and I wouldn't mind some tough as hell guys. They're really, the interesting one on Isaac Okoro is there's really not another player, unless you think Najee Marshall from New Orleans can defend, or maybe Taurean Prince at 30, who's a good defensive player. And that to me is kind of a wild part of this free agency. All right, that's my take. The biggest next question is going to be, how do the Jazz use their cap space? And I think the key on the cap space is 1, signing Lauri to an extension. 2 is having cap space available for trades for teams that need to get under the second apron. Just a reminder, this is geeky stuff, but the second apron teams won't be able to trade their first round pick 7 years out. So if you're a second apron team by the season's end, you automatically have your 2032 pick frozen. If a team remains in the second apron for 2 or 4 of the following 4 seasons, its first round pick isn't just frozen, it's automatically moved to the end of the first round. It also just totally restricts all sorts of other things you do, and the luxury tax is totally punitive. The first apron means that teams can't take in more money than they're trading out. First apron clubs are barred from signing a player waived during the regular season if the salary exceeds the mid-level exception. In the new CBA, the first apron teams will not be limited to just matching salaries 100%, while the non-tax-paying teams, us, can make the math work within 125%. There might be a residual impact on us because we can't make deals with people that need to make deals. That's a sign. So I think, how do we use our cap money? 1, to get Lauri's extension. 2, to be available for trades. And 3, to maybe get some of these players and have them add to our roster. But I honestly don't see a lot of players that are going to be able to move the meter a dramatic amount. All right, here's what we're doing. On audio, you're awesome. Thank you for listening to Locked On Jazz today. Thank you for making Locked On Jazz your first listen. We greatly appreciate it. You're fabulous. And we will have more Locked On Jazz free agency throughout the week. For those of you on Instagram, bye. See you later. Super fun to have you. For those of you on YouTube, we will extend the show to a special edition of Locked On Jazz to answer some of your questions and comments. I'm going to work my way up the comment zone. This is going to get a little rough along the way. Okay? Only because, actually, I'm going to start at the top and see if I can get to the bottom. That's the way I'm going to do it. You guys are talking amongst yourselves a lot, so this is not going to be the smoothest thing, but we're going to keep this going a little bit. Dre says, today is the day that the Jazz, Tobias Harris becomes a Jazz man. I don't think so. I didn't have my DeMar DeRozan conversation. You want to get better? Do you sign DeMar DeRozan to a 2-year, $80 million deal just to get better? What do you think of that? Do you sign DeMar DeRozan and you let DeMar DeRozan play with Lauri Markkanen, and we're way better? We're good late in games. He's 34 years old. We're way better. Gives Keontae less burden. We saw Keontae get overwhelmed by the burden. I'll do a whole show on this probably this week. We'll see. Let's keep going down the board here for questions. A lot of hellos, including me. Any idea of trading Lauri Markkanen to the Warriors is gone because of Chris Paul, says Del Taco, I guess. I don't think we're really trying to trade Lauri Markkanen. I think we've created a market for Lauri Markkanen, and we're going to see what it is, but we have not gone there. Miles Bridges gets interesting here, by the way. If you're a Miles Bridges fan and Charlotte is balking on paying him, Philadelphia and Orlando are not available right now because of the Paul George deal. So you have the cap money of Detroit, San Antonio, and Utah as the only teams that can go after Miles Bridges right now. Miles Bridges is 26 years old. So that's kind of an interesting concept right there. Sorry, trying to scam these. This is why I did not do it. This is true. Collier's built for a fast-paced summer league play. Yeah, he's gonna crush summer league. He might shoot a really low percentage, but he might crush summer league. Malala, he just talks a lot. I love him. Christie getting 4 years, 32 after averaging 4 points. All right. Lowry's contract is going to dictate, alone going to dictate he could get a lot back in the trade. Yes. Here's the market, I think. The market is $8 to $10 million for a player that you might help you, but it may not be in your rotation. Late rotation. Joe Ingles got 11 last year. Max Christie just got 4 years, 32 for 8. Okay. A rotation player, I think, is $20 million a year. The Royce O'Neal deal is pretty great. Royce O'Neal is 4 year, 44, like $11 million, I think, right? Isn't that what he just signed for? That's a pretty great deal. That's Mark Bartelstein giving quite a deal to the Suns. 4 year, 44 for Royce. Now it's also Royce getting, on the back end of that deal, Royce is 35 years old. So maybe that's part of it. But I think a rotation player, 6, 7, 8, it's going to be close to it. A starter is probably around $30 million. What did Emmanuel Quickly just sign? Emmanuel Quickly just signed at 5 year, 175. Is that right? 5 year, 175. So Emmanuel Quickly. Sorry, I should just do the math off the top of my head, but it's about 30, right? 35. A star is somewhere in the 45 to 50 range. The Jazz are waiving Omer Yurtseven. That's a bummer because I like him as a person. I don't think it's a bad basketball move, but I think it's a bummer. I'm trying to see if there's any other news. Kevin Love has finalized a 2-year, $8 million plus deal to the Miami Heat. Cornette 1-year deal back to Boston. James Harden, 2-year, $70 million deal, 35 for a starter, not a star anymore. It's kind of the numbers. Be interesting to see what Clay gets in that. Lauri Markkanen's extension here's the question, does Lauri Markkanen's impact cap space Jazz have to play with? Yes. The Jazz would be trading Lauri Markkanen with their would be able to do it with their cap space. David, you're the man. Oh, that's nice. You most entertaining on the draft. Thank you. Appreciate it. That show's still up on YouTube if you want to see silly takes I'm going to regret. Oh, here it is. Yes, Lauri renegotiate first, so that would take about $15 million of our extra cap space. Yeah, this is great. The way you do it is you give Lauri a bunch of our cap space as a kind of a signing bonus, and then you move the contract on from there. So we'll see. Del Tall, Lito, who never likes anything. No, I don't know. I love these guys. I know Ma Law and Del. These guys are like regulars on these shows. Harkenstein's getting overpaid. I hope it's not us. What do I think of Jalen Smith? I really like him. Isaac Okoro and Jalen Smith would probably be my two free agents I would love the Jazz to sign. This is the big question. Why are we linked to Miles Bridges? How can we reach character and then possibly sign him? So, I mean, it's a really interesting question. Are you going to have a different standard than the rest of the NBA? If someone pays their price to society, are you going to have a higher standard than that? The answers can be yes to these questions. They're not rhetorical. So you just have to decide. Proposed trade. Goga Batadze is another possible signing. Maybe. I would like some. I think Will wants some centers that spread it. Goga's not like, he's pretty good. He's just big, but big matters. He just can't shoot it. I mean, he's just not a shooter. He's just not a shooter. Yeah, I mean, somebody said I wouldn't mind Valanciunas on the Jazz. I just think we need some toughness, right? We didn't. Oh, this is really funny. That's Brett Robbins. # capture the flag. That's really funny. Jazz need a ball handling small forward. We need, I understand why we did it, but when we lost Kelly Olynyk and Simone Fontecchio, it became abundantly clear what happened to our passing. So I think we need to sign people that pass. And then I think we need to sign people that are tough as hell because we were super soft last year. So that's like, if we go back to the Locke likes, and I didn't think we played particularly hard. I mean, I think we played fairly hard, but we need to play harder. So Isaiah Hartenstein plays hard and is tough. Locke likes. Jalen Smith, I think is skilled. I don't know. He may not count on that. Mo Wagner is offensively skilled, passes. Not particularly tough, but gets in the middle of it. Markelle Fultz can be pretty tough and physical, and he passes. Aaron Holiday can be tough and passes. Isaac Okoro can be tough. I don't know if he passes. I mean, he passes because he doesn't shoot, but I don't know if he really passes. Thank you, Michael Grace. Thank you for the nice comments. There are about 300 comments here. I am flying through them as fast as I can. The argument we got to go big or we go tank. I don't see where go big is available. That's kind of the point of today's show. Like, if you're a go big or go tank guy, I don't see a player that makes, like, what do you think we are right now? 32 win team? Maybe more. I don't see a player that jolts us to 50. Right? At least in free agency. Maybe we're going to be able to use our cap space for a trade. That does that. I'm still looking. Shams reported the Jazz are interested in their own roster. Yeah, I mean, I think our first thing is getting Lauri done. Our second thing is we're then making trades. I don't know the rules on whether we can kind of unofficially get something done with Lauri until it's available. But also, like, when teams need to make a trade for Klay Thompson or a trade for Paul George in some capacity, and we're the team with cap space, we could be the ones who profit off that. So we should be thinking, when you're thinking about that, like, that's where you then also might sit out your cap space to wait till see what happens with those guys to be able to make some sort of move. I mean, the whole question about the plan, Danny's whole point is we're being flexible to the day where we can pounce. Right? So we're trying to go big game hunting and do something to get really involved here. And then he literally said, if we don't, we'll have to readjust. All right, that was super fun. Thank you very much for being a part of the live show. Good audience. Hope you enjoyed it. Locked on Jazz all week long during free agency. Have a good one.